Well, the word got around, they said this kid is insane, man. Took up a collection just to send him to the mainland. Get your education, don't forget from whence you came. And the world's gonna know your name. What's your name?
Mr. Onsing. Hey everybody, let's get started. Monday or Tuesday, depending on when your class is. Let's review what I went over. I know sometimes it's hard in Zoom to keep up or to follow along if you're unable to make it. So I just want to quickly review what we did in class. Okay, we started with a vocab quiz. Okay, we started with a vocab quiz. It's just a quick review. It's in the first thing you got to do in the folder for the week. It's just taking 10 words, match them with the definition, and you can only have 5 minutes to do it, right? It's just practice, practice. We're going to keep practicing everything, right? So what we did today, let me see if I can get to my slide. All right, so again, reviewing the issue of rhetorical situation, right? The idea of rhetorical situation, ethos, pathos, and logos, okay? Starting to understand those concepts. Who is the speaker? Who is the audience? What is the message? And how is that message communicated? There we go. So the thing I've been trying to help you focus on, right, is the triangle of how to organize the different ideas, right? How you have the different points, right? The different points to look at speaker, right? Speaker, audience, subject. Speaker, audience, subject. Let me just flip that a little bit, okay? And then again, the sides of the triangle, sides of the triangle. The whole point of this is to help you focus on what are the different parts, look for one thing at a time, right? You're not trying to break through everything, but it's one thing, just go through. Again, you're thinking of each level. Also keep in mind that as you analyze it, you can be looking for any detail in any order, right? So the idea for the analytical process is that you try to make it work for you, that fill it in as you need to. Some people need to start at level 1, right? Sorry, I'm trying to figure out. Start at level 1 and then 2 and then 3, okay? Other people, the way your brain works, just fill in any of it, right? Fill in any of it. When I bring up the passage, I'll go over these more specifically to help you, again, understand what it is you're looking for with each thing, okay? So before we read the passage, and I kind of dive into it a little more deeply with you, I just, again, want to remember that you're focusing on who the speaker is, right? And how they are communicating some sort of idea to an audience, okay? And as that is going through the passage that we read, right, we're thinking about who is the speaker, what do they reveal about themselves, how do they represent themselves, why is my forehead so shiny, this drives me crazy. And either need to change the light or wear a hat, who is the speaker, and then again, how are they communicating, what do they choose to communicate with the audience, right? We went back with the whole issue of the Gettysburg Address. Choices were made, right? Edward Everett spoke for 2 hours. Probably the worst speech ever. But then again, when you look at Lincoln's Gettysburg speech, this is it. This is the entirety of Gettysburg speech. Maybe less than 5 minutes, a couple minutes. Okay? Absolute bro is our Lincoln. Okay? Because he chose not to bore us, but just focus on what's important. Right? Focus on what's important. All right. Okay, the next thing, again, what we're thinking about and where we're going with this rhetorical analysis, right, is starting to think about what are those important concepts? What are those important concepts that we are trying to get to? Okay, so again, if we're thinking about that, the idea is that there are these certain universal themes, right, or social issues that all writers talk about, okay, and that's really what they're trying to get at, okay? Whatever the passage is, there's usually some concept they want you to understand, some truth they want to reveal, some idea, common human idea that they want you to understand, right? So as we work this year, we'll be starting to look for what are these common ideas, and then that can guide our analysis. The thing to keep in mind is that anything you read, the goal is to think about that big idea, okay? So again, the goal is to think about the big idea. What's the big idea? Whatever the speaker says to the audience, right, is to help them understand what that big idea is, So the trick is not to get caught up in the physical or literal things they talk about, because it is never about what it's literally about. You have to be able to look at what are they literally discussing, what are they actually discussing, but then what is the bigger, broader concept that they're trying to push you to. Okay, so they literally use things that they literally talk about: physical objects, real world situations, real world locations, real relationships, things in reality, but then actual mental concepts that they want you to understand. And that's, again, what all authors go through, right? Trying to establish that there's this physical thing I'm going to talk about, but it's really moving towards this mental concept, this idea, going back to some sort of universal theme, that's the word, universal theme, or social issue, right? This idea, I'm going to talk about something literal in the world. So what we're reading this week are examples of this. Concepts and examples to understand how to go through this process and know what to look for, okay? So let's dive into the first passage that we are reading this week to try to understand what's going on.
People, settle down. Okay, now, how many of you have played musical instruments before?
Do instruments of torture count?
No.
Is mayonnaise an instrument?
No, Patrick, mayonnaise is not an instrument. Horseradish is not an instrument either.
Let's go through how I went about doing the annotations, and so you can see the process for the analysis of how you can pick apart the text, break apart the text, and again, do the analysis. Keeping in mind that analysis means taking one thing and breaking it into different pieces, right? Breaking it into separate parts. So that's where a benefit of using a digital text, right? Using a digital file is that you can manipulate the text, right? You can move text around. You can obviously highlight. You can add in some of your own things to help you organize and keep track of the separate parts, which may be easier than if it was just on paper. Okay, so you notice I've highlighted some things. Okay, obviously that's one of the most fundamental things for doing an analysis and annotations, right? Just highlighting stuff. But then also notice, like I added in a little label here for the different section, right? That part of the analysis, again, is going through understanding how it's organized and how the text is structured. So I've labeled their section 1, and then you could even, again, add sort of a little summary of what's in that section. Here's what the next thing is about. And all that can be added in as you're reading it or after you're reading it. Again, the part of analysis is that you can add in different pieces at different times. Okay? You're not going to find everything all at once. You usually do need to read the text more than once. Now, if we go through. So, and again, as you can see, I need to stop saying again. Yeah, that's going to be what I'm going to try to remind myself of. As I go through, I add comments to try to explain what is the idea of what he has just said. Okay? What is the concept, or maybe again, the emotion, the idea, or the relationship ethos he is establishing. You notice vocabulary words. For example, I'm using syntax. That's one of the vocabulary words. Identifying from the very beginning, he is trying to establish this tension with these, with a series of short sentences. Coming home at night, skittering in the dark. It's a dog, dog on the loose, no leash. because this connects to pathos, right? And that's the spaghetti, where everything is all mixed together. The meatballs, the noodles, and the sauce. He uses the syntax, which then leads to this creating a mood from the very beginning with this tension. This raccoon that he encounters, right, sets up this situation, this anecdote, right? And if we're thinking of all of our fancy vocabulary words, right, using these different anecdotes. And then the next section, breaking it into a section lets you focus on one piece at a time, Instead of trying to figure out what the entire thing is, if you see it as just one giant blob of text, it's harder for you to manage and to think about your ideas. But if you break it into individual sections, that's the word, you can focus on just one piece at a time. After going through each piece, then you can see a progression of how one idea moves to the next idea. So we have this raccoon, then we notice he starts talking about this coyote with a different anecdote. And the next section, we get these evil geese, right? We know geese, the most evil creature you could possibly encounter. All right, geese, this other situation where trying to defend yourself, right? Defend yourself. You notice he's using kind of overtop language, maybe a little sarcastic, right? It's sort of a ridiculous situation. Irony, okay? Noticing the connection there. You could either call it sarcasm, or you could say it's ironic, the situation that he's discussing. Okay? And then we know the next passage, a coyote to a cougar, right? And then a cougar to a plane crash, right? Plane crash. Each section presents a different story of something that threatens his life. He tries to deal with it with some humor, right? His hyperbolic language, his sarcastic response to everything. But the thread through it all, right, is fear of these beasts, right? This unknown danger as he goes through with each one. So what my comments are, okay, what my annotations are not just paraphrasing what he has said, but connecting to the ideas he wants me to understand, the thought process he's pushing the audience to, the rhetorical devices or strategies he chooses to use from each one. Okay, so by the end, right, he's still establishing this idea of living in fear, this fear of unknown danger, right? If we notice the term diction, you use that term, that's individual word choice. He chooses to call it a beast instead of just animal, right? Because beast has a certain meaning behind it. This something powerful, something unknown, has a stronger connotation than just animal. As we go through the entire text, right, from one section to the next, if I'm thinking about organization, how he moves from one section to the next, we notice he starts with something simple. He thinks it's just a dog, then it's a raccoon, raccoon to coyote, coyote to geese. Obviously, geese are more dangerous than coyotes, I would say. I've been attacked by more geese in my life than coyotes. And then cougar, plane crash, unknown danger. So as we see as he goes throughout the text, the dangers he experienced, they escalate, right? They amplify from something that's maybe relatively less dangerous to something that's extremely more dangerous and life-threatening. This escalating danger, right? One other aspect to keep in mind as you read the text, okay, is how he uses his ethos, uses his ethos. It is a passing mention that he has, right? That he's in a motorized wheelchair. It's not the main focus of the piece. It's an aspect of himself that he uses to add to the tension and develop the concept. A lot of times, students who read this passage get distracted by that. Okay? They get distracted and they think this is only for an audience of other disabled people, other people with disabilities. But ethos doesn't always, again, work that way, right? Ethos is just to help you connect and understand the situation or perspective of who the author is. Okay, so it's being used to get to this idea of fear, this idea of mortality, right? Fear of death. And that's something that is universal. Okay? It's not just people with disabilities that have a fear of death and this awareness of mortality, although it might be something heightened, right? But the point is to connect to universal idea, right? That is a universal concept that affects people at some point in their lives. So using ethos, right, something literal, actual, factual about his life, to push us to understanding this concept, this universal theme that relates to everybody. And that, again, that's the move that all authors use. They move from something individual to universal, right? Individual to universal. They start with some individual experience, some individual situation that they then connect to the universal experience of all humanity. Yeah, that's one of the most basic, fundamental writing tools, writing processes that authors use. Okay, starting with a personal, individual situation that then can connect to the universal. So with this one, I mean, I'll be honest, we very often do not read work from people with disabilities, right? They are not widely represented in the array of authors that we read. That's why to us, we think it's something unique, so it must be part of his purpose, right? Where this is just an aspect of his individuality, an aspect of his identity that he is using to connect to the universal. Right? So if we think about it in the movement of his ideas from the escalating danger, right? Something that maybe only might threaten him, to danger that all people might face. Plane crash is something that, regardless of your ability, would threaten your life, right? Regardless of your ability, a cougar would threaten your life. That's why we notice this progression from something that might be just an individual danger for him to a universal sense of our mortality with the plane crash, how he moves from one to the next. And then as we organize this analysis, so when we start breaking down the analysis and start organizing to people, the different topics, okay, we look at speaker, who's the audience, what's the subject. That's our first level. So the speaker, the author is Mike Ervin. Did I spell that right? I didn't put the title on here. I believe I spelled that right. Hold on, I'm going to go check. Yes, spelled right. Okay. What do we know about him? Let's see. The detail, he is in a motorized wheelchair. Again, you could do a lot of research. You could look into background information about who the actual person is, right? But you have to always stay focused on what are the details about themselves that they give you in the text, because that is what is significant. There are certain details about themselves that they want to highlight and make sure you focus on. And they selectively choose certain things to focus on. Mike Ervin could have gone through this whole thing and not even mention that he was in a motorized wheelchair, right? And it would still be plausible, the different situations that he discusses. Okay? He uses that to add to and emphasize that idea of vulnerability, okay? To hook us in. And notice he says it at the very beginning because it wants to establish that idea of vulnerability that he then adds to and then connects to the vulnerability that all people have. What else do we know? Lives in Chicago. lives in Chicago. All right, let's see. Shrink that down a little bit so it all fits. Okay. Again, the ending line of this passage is, you could say, perfectly keeping with his, his attitude, sense of sarcasm, but it kind of focuses on people that have that sort of fear about the life that we lead, right? About fear about the world around us. This passage is not meant just for people with disabilities. That's another thing that I kind of have to help students work through. Just because he himself has a disability is just part of his ethos. It is not controlling and forcing everything about this passage, and it is not limiting the passage to just that audience, right? So there are more people that have this sense of maybe fear of the outside world than just people with disabilities. Okay. Danger, mortality, death. That's his topic. Okay. He uses syntax, sarcasm. Actually, I'm thinking of rhetorical devices. Boop. I'm going to highlight these. I'm going to move them. I think I am. There we go. See, you put them there. Good talk. So rhetorical appeals would be pathos, fear, but also humor. Okay, he mixes fear and humor. Again, establishing that he has that vulnerable situation in his life, but then ultimately we all do. And if you could maybe say, so that makes me think we're all, oh, that's deep. That is deep stuff. We're all vulnerable to our mortality. This passage I also use to point out that sometimes writers are just trying to mess with your head. Okay, so compared to some other things we've read, like the Ain't I a Woman passage or the Florence Kelly speech against child labor, this is not trying to push you to some real action, right? Maybe it's just trying to make you have some awareness of what's going on in life, how you live your life, maybe help free you of fear that you have about mortality. So oftentimes writers can share that this is a common experience to let you know that it's just something normal that you can deal with and that everybody can deal with. Okay. He's in Chicago, modern, not very relevant, right? The context for this passage is maybe not very relevant. In contrast to, say, like the Gettysburg Address, or contrast to Sojourner Truth's speech in the mid 19th century, pre-Civil War, trying to abolish slavery and push for women's rights, right? The context of those other speeches are very strong in affecting what you read. This passage, maybe not so much, not as much, okay? Because in a way, he's talking about sort of just this timeless aspect of human nature, not something tied to a certain time period. How we put it, and you don't have to exactly agree with what I'm putting, right? He's sarcastic, humorous, self-deprecating, kind of mocking himself in a way when he makes fun of like how scared he gets about being on a plane. Sarcastic, humorous, self-deprecating. I think it makes me want to. Here we go. So when we think about the organization or the structure, escalation, things keep getting worse. So the organization and structure part is you're looking at how, what are the ideas and how do the ideas progress from one passage to the next? How do they progress from one passage to the next. And again, you're just filling in as you go along, right? You're just filling in as you go along, and you can keep adding to them, right? So the rhetorical devices, syntax, sarcasm, anecdotes, rhetorical questions, which are the worst. Never use it. You do not have permission to use rhetorical questions. Mike Ervin, he's totally fine. He can get away with it. I allow it. Not for you guys, though. So then if we go through thinking about the author's reason, his method, and his purpose. What event, incident, or situation motivated the speaker to speak? Scared by a raccoon? Scared. No, come on. Had a moment where he just realized how, you could say, vulnerable he is, how much his mortality might have an impact on his life. Hold on, I'm trying to organize these. Okay. So he had this realization, right, of the dangers that are out there. Realization. I swear I can spell it. There we go. Hey. What did he do to affect the audience? Used a series of anecdotes.
Hello?
Sorry. Weird. Anecdotes and all right, I swear I can talk. Count, or I can type. I can't talk either. Okay. Humor. Humor. There we go. So he chose to laugh, had to use humor to discuss frightening situations, right? I do that every time. It's disarming in a way, right? He's not trying to make you afraid. He's wanting you to notice that we have fear. And so maybe that connects to his purpose. Okay. Notice we have fear. Notice we are mortal, but can still laugh about it. Now I'm kind of typing full sentences here. You don't have to. We can still laugh about it. It doesn't have to paralyze us, stop us from living. I think that's the better way to say it. It doesn't have to stop us from living. Notice we have fear. We're mortal, but still can laugh about it. It doesn't have to stop us from living our lives. Just recognize how tough it is, but we keep living our lives. So the speaker did this because he wanted what to happen after. Allow us to accept. I'm kind of extending it. This is not explicitly stated. So this is where, when this passage, say you're thinking about the purpose, you are starting to get into, again, that interpretation. Okay? Allow us to accept our fears and continue living. Thesis is where you tie that. The author uses a series of personal anecdotes and humorous situations to help us deal with, I should have just been typing. The author uses a humorous anecdotes, humorous, ouch, I cannot type. I don't know why you guys are watching this. My brain, I have a brain. sarcasm. Ooh, series of brushes with death help break us from the grip fear has on our. I don't know. I'm just making this up. We'll call that a rough draft of the thesis, right? We can keep adding to it. We're going to keep. I have a lot planned for how to figure out thesis. But this is the general process we go through, right? This is the general process we go through as we break apart the different pieces. Okay, looking at what are the different pieces, and then trying to go through the different reasons for why he uses those different pieces. Okay, good.